I would like to welcome you again to our second panel of the day, a panel on a very critical topic for the industry on geopolitics, global economy and commerce, and are we heading into a new era? And I think the overall sentiment is that we are heading into a new era as vaccines are becoming more available, the world is coming out of the pandemic, the global economy is opening up. At the same time, coming out of the pandemic doesn't mean that we're not facing challenges. So this panel is going to tackle a lot of these issues. I'm grateful to John Keough of Clyde, who is participating and moderating expertly this event every year, this particular panel. I'd like to welcome Kathy, Sadan, René, Rolf, and Mark, and thank you all. We were saying before that really technology gives us the opportunity to connect and address the global industry. So thank you very much for being with us. And John, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you everyone for attending this session. Good morning. My name is John Keough. I'm a partner in Clyde & Co. Law firm, and I'm based here in the New York office. I co-head the firm's North American practice on shipping and international trade and energy. Now, as Nicholas mentioned, our panel will address the geopolitical challenges and the opportunities that we see in shipping in the coming year and even beyond. Now, we're privileged to have with us on the panel some of the prominent leaders in our business today. We have with us Sadan Kaptanoglu, the president of BIMCO and the CEO of Kaptanoglu Shipping. We have Kathy Metcalf, who is president and CEO of the Chamber of Shipping of America. We have Mark O'Neill, who is president of Columbia Shipmanagement and also president of InterManager, an international trade association for ship and crew managers. Also joining us, we're delighted to have Rolf Jansen, the CEO of Hapag-Lloyd, and René Kofod-Olsen, the CEO of V.Ships. Now, our panel will focus on essentially 4 key geopolitical challenges for shipping in the months ahead. First, the people problem, the crisis in crew and staff management in shipping, the humanitarian crisis that the industry is facing in this pandemic world. Now, there'll be a panel after hours that will address this topic as well. But we will touch on this topic in the key respects that these business leaders see it affecting their business from a geopolitical stance. Second, the decarbonization issue. It's first and foremost in many minds in the business today, as people face a patchwork of regulation and soon to be regulation, which sometimes seems like a crazy quilt on an international or regional basis, and how they meet that business challenge in planning. Third, ransomware and cybersecurity and piracy, issues that are troubling the industry today, traps that can stop a business in its footsteps. They are costly, they create huge human losses and business losses in the business. And last but not least, we'll try to touch on the effect of trade tariffs and sanctions. There's a new administration in town. The Biden administration has been in office now over a month, and they've instituted some bold new policies. How are those working out? How do our industry leaders see those playing out? And before we turn to the panel, I would like to just take a moment to emphasize the importance of this humanitarian crisis facing the crews and staffing around the world. Some people have been on ships stranded at sea for over 2 years. It's a crisis that calls out for a global solution, and indeed the IMO and the UN and other organizations, the Neptune Declaration has been put in place, and many organizations are showing their support to try to cure this problem. And I would just take the chance to urge our business leaders listening today to use this as an opportunity to raise the bar, attack the problem yourselves. Let's take a challenge, each one of us, and attack the problem by trying to solve this with active energy generated and initiated by your businesses. If you saw these people at sea, would you sail by? Each business needs to initiate an active response now. And I'll just mention a quick quote from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who spoke about positive leadership in his last written address in 1945. His words were these: "The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Let us move forward with a strong and active faith." With that, I'd like to turn to our panel. Let me ask Sadan. First of all, Sadan, as president of BIMCO, what are you seeing as the key geopolitical challenges facing shipping today, and what are the opportunities that can come of it?
Well, hello everybody, and thank you, John. This is like a $1 million question. But I have to say, we are still going through unprecedented times. And although now we have the vaccination and then the economies are opening slowly, but still, we have a lot of way to go. And the precautions that the governments are taking is almost same at the war times. So I think this is the pandemic itself is the greatest challenge we have been facing for a long time. And also the pandemic act as an accelerator as well. So you see that they speed up things. And so if you look at from this perspective, everything become geopolitical, But, in order to highlight some of them is, I think in the months ahead, we have to tackle how we can make our industry resilient. I think shipping performed perfectly during the pandemic. Well done to all of us, but at a cost. And the cost, as you mentioned earlier, very rightfully, these are the well-being of our seafarers. This is not acceptable. So we have to be sure that all industries working together to make our supply chain and shipping resilient, so that we will not go through something like this again. And of course, cybersecurity will be an issue because of the acceleration of digitalization. Piracy is a big issue, especially Nigerian piracy, I have to name it. And of course, the economics are, worsened. And we have the sanctions and increased competition between USA, Russia, China. So nothing is actually, in that sense, good for the world. Sometimes some fractions of, problems can support shipping for the short term. But on the long run, on the long term, only well-being of the world will sustain shipping. So if you want a sustainable shipping. And having said that, the biggest challenge to me is still the decarbonization, because that will change the whole structure and the whole technology of shipping. So it is the biggest challenge to me. And of course, again, pandemic is accelerating that the response we want to give to the climate change. And of course, 60,000 vessels, worldwide will not disappear and become decarbonized overnight. So this is a process. And right now, last November, we have in the IMO, we have the short-term measures, and in BIMCO, we are tackling them. What we want is a global and practical measures for the short-term period. And at the same time, we also think that, if we look at the time frame of the, our target towards the decarbonization, we have to be proactive. So we are also, working on the research and development fund at the same time, so that, we can gather all the innovation together. We can give solutions, more than one solution to shipping industry. But at the same time, we think it is time to discuss about market-based measure, a global market-based measures. So, and I think that in that way, we can keep the level playing field, and also this can create a competitive edge for the early comers. So we will not, at least not punish them. So right now, I would say we have to start the discussion at the IMO, a global, I have to underline this, global market-based measure discussions in order to be ready when the technology is commercially there, so we can transform our industry. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Mark O'Neill, tell us from Columbia Shipmanagement's perspective, I know you have some strong feelings about what action should be taken during this pandemic, especially with the crewing crisis and on decarbonization. What are your thoughts on these challenges facing us?
Hi, John, and thanks very much for having me. I would echo a lot of what Sadan has said there. I think what we're seeing at the moment, and we're still, of course, perhaps not in the middle of the pandemic, but certainly in the second half of the pandemic, we're seeing a real a world of dichotomies. We have the haves and the have-nots, the rich versus the poor, east versus west, vaccinated versus non-vaccinated, and that's the challenge ahead of us, USA versus China. So I think we are coming out of this pandemic into an extremely febrile environment, and that's going to pose its challenges for shipping, as it will for every other industrial sector. I think what we've noticed, and I think a lot of the other panelists will share this, is the lesson that we've learned from this pandemic more than any other is that people actually matter. And it's this human element. Sadan talked about accelerators. It's this human element that was murmured perhaps in the backdrop or against the backdrop of technology and digitalization before the pandemic. This human element has come to the real fore. There is a huge expectation, a huge ambition, a huge reassessment in ourselves and our people as to what's important going forward. And I think the challenge for the shipping industry, for ship management industry, will to ensure that we're in step with those expectations. For instance, we're seeing in the geopolitical reorganization that's going on at the moment, east versus west, the repositioning of industry, the recalling of many of the heavy industry from the east back to the west, because we need to have that industry more strategically placed. What is the expectation of our people? V-Ships talked about recently in the press the weaponizing. I think it was René, and apologies if I'm misquoting you, but the weaponizing of data as being the real key differentiator of the future. I would respectfully disagree. I don't think there is the appetite or the expectation that existed before this pandemic in this whole technological digitalization process. I think we are now going to be going into a phase of empowering people to use data along with other facilitators to better enhance people performance. And shipping is about people. Data, digitalization, technology are the tails on the dog, and the tails mustn't wag the dog. These are only tools to enhance people's performance. So really, I think people have been put to the very forefront of our businesses, and it's really important that we recognize that and are in tune and are in step with what people want going forward. Do they want environmental change? Do they want social changes? Do they want globalization or nationalization? Do they want self-sufficiency? Do they want green recycling and these decarbonization issues? Are those the drivers of people as we come out of this pandemic? Time will tell, but I think it's really important for all of our organizations to double down and focus on our people and what our people want and for shipping to be in step with that.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. René, would you like to respond to that point and your view on both decarbonization and digitalization and these other issues we're wrestling with?
Absolutely, I would love to, and thank you, Mark, for the challenge. Sorry?
There's a lot to unpack there.
No, and we shouldn't repeat what others have said of valuable insights. And I'll start a different place, and I will come back to your point, Mark, because I actually don't think we disagree. I think people is really the challenge of the future. When I think about growing up in shipping, starting some 30 years ago, then of course this was the place to go. And especially in a little country like Denmark, surrounded by water. But today, I would like actually to hear the young people, what makes them go to sea? And I think that is a discussion that we do not really entertain enough of. And that comes back to the branding of shipping generally. And we spoke about that the other day, that the brand of shipping needs to take the forefront of conversations much, much more than it's doing today. We are hiding away from the fact that we are the bedrock of global trade. 71% of this fantastic planet is water, and we carry goods, liquid, dry, around the world. And we do it, by the way, much better and much more sort of carbon neutral than anybody else does right now. And we are expected to invest and continue investing in doing it much, much better. So I think we have a huge responsibility as leaders of this industry to brand it better. And here comes the catch in terms of attracting craftsmanship. People expect to have access to their everyday life that we didn't need 30 years ago when we started in this industry. And therefore, there is a big responsibility for us to digitize our businesses to ensure that the crew, when they are at the high seas, have a possibility to actually feel connected with the world. If we are disconnected from that fact, I do not believe that we will be living up to the expectations of the new generations of seafarers and actually the new generation of onshore shipping people that wants to go into this industry. So I think the craftsmanship is something we really need to drive. So of course, the decarbonizing argument is then coming in the tail of that, because why? Because otherwise the young people simply do not want to come and have a career in shipping. I recently left an offshore company in oil and gas, and we were all shying away from having the conversation around how energy actually light up this conversation, light up our houses. So there is a transition period where we need energy. We should speak positively around the right energy, perhaps not coal, which is a third of the energy we burn around the world today, but certainly we need energy there for the foreseeable future. And therefore, we cannot put them in the doghouse. It's a very, very fundamental part of global trade. And so when I speak about weaponizing data and weaponizing our digital strategies, it's actually that. It is to ensure that we attract people. It's to ensure that we become predictive, that we assist the decarbonizing agenda, that we become much more future-proof as businesses. And we simply need that. We need to harness all the weather data we can get. We need to harness the fuel efficiency data we can get. We need to ensure that there is links to the vessels when they are in the high seas, where we can actually communicate with shore. Those things I feel is very, very important. And then take energy out of the doghouse and bring it on the forefront, because we need it for the foreseeable future, but we need a transition plan. That's very, very important. All of us wants to decarbonize. All of us wants to rewire the world, but it takes the right strategies.
How is the use of data impacting your efforts to allocate and commit capital in achieving your decarbonization goals? So is that a factor?
I think that's a big factor, and I'll tell you why. When I have discussed with clients, and many of them recently, I've traveled the world on Zoom or Teams. It's a big part of the conversation, because everybody is expected to deliver all the right ESG strategies. Everybody is expected, therefore, to know about how their vessels are performing almost in real time. And the more we can deliver, both Mark and myself, to our clients in terms of that breadth in our performances, I actually believe that we can better deliver value for our clients simply by being that little bit more predictive. So we are investing heavily in IT.
Thanks, Rolf. At Hapag, how do you see the challenges as a container line operator How do you see this new geopolitical world shaping up to meet the challenges that these folks have been describing?
A lot has already been said. I think also for us, the decarbonization is probably the biggest challenge. If you look a little bit further out, and I think it's important there that you don't only talk about where you want to be in 20 or 30 years from today, because, you know, as I've said multiple times, it's quite easy for us to say that we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, because that's all ships that still need to be built today, and most likely that's going to be based on a technology that we don't fully have available today, and it's going to be run by management that's no longer going to be around, or that's all going to be new. So I don't want to promise that on their behalf, and I think we try to improve also year on year on year, and as such are right now probably more focused on meeting the goals by 2030. And that means that, you know, we need to modernize our fleet. That means we need to invest in newer ships, and in our case we opted for LNG for the time being, which I still think it's a little bit surprising that we don't see more uptake on that, because it is probably one of the few bridging technologies that's already available today, and you then would also have engines that potentially can run also on carbon neutral fuels, once you have synthetic gas, for example. But okay, you know, that's the way to approach it. That is probably the biggest challenge. Of course, we have also some shorter term challenges which are very much driven by the pandemic. I mean, the crew changes were already mentioned. I would say we are there probably, relatively speaking, still in a lucky position, because we have a lot of liner services that call big ports, and even if every crew change is a project by itself, in most cases we find a way to get it done, even if people sometimes have to stay a little bit longer on board. I think it's been very tough in the beginning, then became easier through the summer. Now it's again a bit tougher, but we also gained more experience. So for us, I would say right now that's a manageable problem. And as far as other geopolitical measures are concerned, I mean, of course, you know, trade wars are never good. On the other hand, we've also seen that in many cases that leads to diversion of flows and not so much to the disappearance of flows. Because yes, sometimes we talk about reshoring, and sometimes we talk about splitting, going from single to multiple sourcing, but that doesn't tend to result in a lot less international transportation. And I still believe that also, if you look at the next 10 years, there's probably still going to be some growth. It's probably not going to be as much as it was 10 or 15 years ago, but to be honest, that's also totally fine.
Are you seeing changes in the supply chain during this pandemic, and do you expect any impact to ripple through after the pandemic?
Probably more after than during. I mean, today, I guess most of the logistics and supply chain managers are focused on making sure that they get their goods to destination. And they're probably not looking at a lot of disruptive changes to their supply chains. And you know, as I said in a previous discussion, I mean, well, if you want to take a decision today to move your factories from China to India, you probably still want to go to India once, to see if the new factory is really there and if it meets your requirements. So I think you're going to see very few of those decisive decisions being taken over the next 3 to 6 months. But for sure, when you fast forward 2, 3, 4, 5 years, there will be an ongoing shift from between countries. But in fairness, we've already seen quite a lot of that over the last 10 years, as we have seen places like Indonesia and Vietnam, for example, grow a lot faster than for instance, in China. And also nearshoring is something that is not new.
What are you seeing with the ability to deliver vaccines for the crews on your vessels? Is there progress that you can update us on in trying to solve that problem?
No, I mean, it's being worked on quite hard. I mean, you mentioned the Neptune Declaration, and there's all kinds of discussions around how critical seafarers, of course, are. I think all of us have seen that, as Sadan also mentioned in the beginning. They are a little bit the unsung heroes, among the unsung heroes of this pandemic. But so far, it's, you know, there's not a lot of consistencies, so to say, in the policies in various places. I believe one of the things we've also learned here is that policies and rules are different everywhere, and that is a big thing that we need to fight. And if we would look at decarbonization, for example, I would strongly hope that we indeed come up with some kind of global rule, because to have different rules everywhere is simply quite unworkable, and in the end also, you know, will not be very efficient if we want to make progress towards the goals that we are all aiming for.
Right, right. That's a good point. Kathy, from your position at the Chamber of Shipping of America, could you fill us in on what you're seeing in terms of solutions for the crewing crisis, the efforts with decarbonization and some of these other problems, and weigh in, if you would, on how the new Biden administration policies may be affecting any of this?
Yeah, well, certainly. And thanks, John, and thanks to all who are attending the session. There's a great, excuse me, a great benefit in being on a panel with such stellar colleagues, because all the smart comments that have already been made, I don't have to repeat. And I'm honored to be among this group of leaders in the industry. What I would say from my personal perspective and the Chamber's perspective, having sailed for 6 years as a deck officer, everything we do, we need to think about the impact on our mariners. Whether we're at IMO talking about decarbonization, whether we're talking about vaccinations or whatever, every decision we make impacts our mariners. And to some degree, we're kind of overloading our mariners with a lot more issues than what they've ever had to deal with. People do make a difference. And I just want to echo what the previous commenters have said. It is about people. It's not about steel ships. It's not about containers. It's not about fuel. It's about the people that move it. And so keeping that as a preeminent consideration as we move forward in this business, this great business, I might add, is most important. I think what the pandemic has done has forced us to change the way we work and to change the way we think. And if there's any positive aspect of having going through the pandemic, it is forcing some of us old dogs, and I'm talking about those of us that have been in the industry for 30 or 40 years, to think a little more outside the box, if you will. I had the honor yesterday of participating in a panel hosted by the Australian Maritime folks, and they have something called a leadership forum, and they bring up and coming folks that are in middle management in a variety of maritime related fields. And they were very gracious about thanking me for coming, but I really felt the need to thank them for making me think a little younger. And so I think with the pandemic and noting that I have less time left in this industry than I've already spent in it, that gift of more thoughtful processes and how we view the future, whether we're retired or not, is most important. I'm not going to repeat what's already been said. Clearly, decarbonization is a paradigm shift for the industry. I've been, at IMO since the late 1990s. I've seen ballast water conventions. I've seen, a number of Annex 6 air emissions conventions and annexes. And we are now engaged in probably the most important discussion that I have ever been honored to experience. So the decarbonization issue, as I believe Rolf and René has mentioned, it is a process. It's not something that we can flip a switch and suddenly we're decarbonized. It is ships, it is engines, it is mariners and training, it is fuel development, it is manufacturers development, and probably most importantly, it's an infrastructure issue as well. We can have the greenest ship in the world and the greenest fuel ashore, and if we don't have some way to connect the two, we've lost it. So that is certainly an overarching need. Let me get to something that perhaps is more unique to the chamber, and that's President Joe Biden and how he will be expected to impact or to change the landscape for the maritime industry on an international basis. As most of you know, he is committed to rejoin the Paris Agreement. You're going to see the United States a lot more active in discussions, both within the Paris Agreement format, but also within the IMO, which in the prior 4 years has been sort of dormant. But I think what you're also going to see with President Biden is less isolationism, which is the prior 4 years, and more outreach towards multilateral and bilateral discussions on trade, a real hard look at the sanctions that are currently in place right now, which these are economic sanctions, as all are aware, but for political reasons. And so I think the Biden administration will look at negotiations to remedy the political reasons so that some of the sanctions can be backed off on. And so there'd be less economic impact with successful political level, diplomatic level discussions with some of the countries that are involved right now. I think what you're also going to see is, per President Biden's statement early in his administration, he is supportive of the robust enforcement of international obligations. And the message hidden there is, I think we're going to see an administration that supports global versus regional. And I hesitate to mention the EU and the currently proposed emissions trading system, but I think you're going to see this administration support global regimes to address not only safety, but environmental issues. And that is a positive. So I've gone on way too long, but that's kind of a quick glimpse on the Biden administration and where I think we see some very positive aspects for the next 4 years of that administration. Thanks, John.
Thank you. No, thank you for that insight on your views of what's changing, especially in respect to the new administration's policies going forward. Do any of our panelists, anybody want to comment on the changes they're seeing or expecting to see with China trade tariffs and the retaliatory mode of things there and how that's impacting your businesses? Sadan, sure.
I think I can make a general comment as a BIMCO president, because, restrictions, sanctions, tariffs is not good for our business. If possible, the political thing should be dealt in the political area, so that because trade is not necessarily all about money, but it's also prosperity, and the globalization should result as prosperity, not as a big political fight between elephants, and then we poor people will be harmed under with the grasses. So I think in principle, and I believe that with the Biden administration, we will see much more, I would say, cooperative and diplomatic efforts, and so to make the things global and prosperous. Thank you.
Yeah, do you see an effect, Rolf, do you see an effect with congestion off China, for example, as a result of the trade tariff battles, and is that impacting your business?
No, not really. I mean, I think we saw a bit of a shift between China and some of the Southeast Asian countries in the earlier years of the Trump administration. But if we look back at last year, then we see again quite a big surge in volume from Asia to North America. Well, if we talk about the American politics, then I think one of the things that at some stage they will have to look at is port infrastructure. Yeah? I think one of my colleagues actually said it quite nicely at the TPM yesterday. In Asia, they work 7 times 24 to produce the goods. They work 7 times 24 to load the goods, and then we unload them on a 17 times 5 basis. every week. And then, of course, you end up at some stage with congestion, and especially in a time like today, where you also have all kinds of COVID-related restrictions and labor shortages and things like that. And to me, when you look at international trade, then port infrastructure, that sometimes the lack of investment in there and also low productivity in some places is something that, you know, we have to ask ourselves the question: how can we fix that, or how can we make that better? And there's various ways to do that. I mean, you can do that in all kinds of ways, but I do think that we have a structural capacity constraint there, yeah, that at some stage needs to be addressed. And I know it's a very difficult topic to talk about. It's also politically quite sensitive. And next year, I believe we have also some of the labor contracts expiring. But I do think that those are the type of things that at some stage need to be attacked and resolved if we want to make sure that goods keep flowing, you know, smoothly, yeah, year in, year out. And I think that has actually more impact probably than you know, the various discussions that there are on trade relations, where, you know, I think there's some very valid points that are being brought to the table.
Thank you. Thanks. Mark O'Neill, on cybersecurity. Well, let me ask you, Mark, I know your organization has taken some bold steps to try to deliver vaccines to your staff and crew members around the world. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you see as an important development? What is the cutting edge there that you're leading?
I think, and this is something I'd like Kathy to take up with the US authorities, and maybe new President Biden can take a lead here, because I think humanity is about to make one of perhaps the greatest miscalculations of all time in relation to the rollout of the vaccines. I talked about the dichotomies that are arising during and coming out of this pandemic, the haves and the have-nots, the riches versus the poor, the vaccinated versus the non-vaccinated. It's an unfortunate truism that the majority of our seafarers, all of us here, come from some of the poorest countries in the world that unfortunately, again, fall into the have-nots and the not vaccinated category, and will be the last countries to vaccinate their populations. Unless the world and the leading countries in the world take a more global view and a more humanitarian view of vaccination, then I think we're going to get into a situation where the wheels literally come off and the propellers stop turning, because vessels will not have vaccinated crews on board, because the countries from which those seafarers come are last in the vaccination chain. And we're going to have more and more owners and operators who insist on fully vaccinated crews, and they will not be available. So the very way out of this pandemic, the very way back to prosperity, will be denied to all of these countries. As wearing my InterManager hat, we've spoken, or we've written to the UK government, what better way for global Britain to show its credentials by providing vaccines, which it appears to have enough of, to the 1.7 million seafarers of the world. There's not that many. That's not that many seafarers, but we've had precious little constructive response to date. I know, Kathy, we've talked about this before as well, and there's various other industry groups, whether it's the Neptune Declaration or others, making the same point. But unless we all speak with one voice and one compelling voice, and unless governments adopt this global view and realize that without shipping, 95% of the world's goods won't get to their destinations, then I'm afraid the propellers will stop turning simply on that vaccination point. And you will be left with a very febrile environment where, you know, accentuating this haves, have-nots, which it can't be in anyone's best interest. Coming back, sorry, I haven't answered your question. I got that off my chest. Coming back to your question, what have we done? We've actually gone out and ordered 7,000 vaccines, and we hope very much to get them for the benefit of some of our crew that won't or will perhaps be in the at the tail end of the vaccination chain, because unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, we're seeing national governments not take the responsibility and provide a solution to international crewing. So I think commercial organizations such as ourselves, putting people, and it comes back to my initial points, at the center of what we do, we have to, because they will look to us, our seafarers, having gone through this whole pandemic, having stood shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand with us, and endured sometimes 12 to 18 months on board the vessels. Goodness, they at the very least deserve a vaccination from us, whether it costs $2, $35, or whatever it costs. I sometimes think actually Amazon's best investment they could ever make would be to buy the world seafarers a vaccination and keep the Amazon goods flow moving. But there you go. It may be that it comes to that. Who knows?
René, your views on the cybersecurity and ransomware risks facing businesses today. We know that shipping has been hit hard by cyber hacks. Maersk, MSC, Anglo Eastern, CMA, to name just a few, whose businesses have been walloped by this. What are your thoughts on that as a challenge and a geopolitical challenge facing the business?
Yeah, thank you, John. I'll reply to that, but I just want to make a comment so we can get the debate here on the vaccinations. So I agree with a lot of what has been said, but you have the situation of the haves and have-nots, and I think if we start as private companies to go in the lines of the governments and buy vaccines, I think that's a very, very slippery slope. I think we need to stay true to the declarations that we have done, work together with the organization, try and push the NGOs, if certainly Bezos has one of those, Mark, but that we private companies start to get into the logistics chain of vaccines, no matter how much compassion we have. I think that's a challenge. So we really need to stand together and make decisions as an industry and push governments to make seafarers critical sort of employees for the entire world. That we should do. But I'm very concerned that we as private individual companies start to go into the logistics chains of vaccines. That's a big dilemma for the industry right now.
How can you increase that pressure on the NGOs?
Yeah, I think it's great what Mark has done with the UK government, and I think that's the right way to do it. And I think we should all ask the organizations of the world, really, including WHO, to put our seafarers as critical seafarers, put them first in line in the logistics. Because starting now to have a quest for vaccines as a private company, that is what all governments are telling us not to do. So it's really a dichotomy and we're all in a conundrum, to use these words. But I really think we need to stand together on this one. Now, coming to cyber security, I think that will only increase. And if I talk about weaponizing digitalization, then you imagine that all floating assets of the industry will potentially be targets, and the organizations ditto. And so this is something that we just have to live with. And I think the sooner all our organizations realize that it is not a matter of if we will be penetrated. It's not a matter of if we'll have intruders coming in. It's just a matter of how we deal with it when they are in and how quickly we can get them out again. I think it's naive for a business today to believe that they have sort of shields from hackers, from ransomware, from phishing, and so on. We do not. If you look at it as a gate, they will pass the gate. But the question is, how far will they go in before we can stop them? How many corridors can we actually make to ensure that they don't get to where it becomes dangerous? They don't get to the so-called control room. But it starts by accepting that they will enter and then having plans to how to deal with it.
Sadan, I see the IMO has acted on this, and what is BIMCO's view on this issue?
This issue, you mean the cybersecurity or vaccination, or shall I just say both?
Either or both. You can comment on both.
I think for the vaccination, we have to, stand together and work harder. And I think at this point, any idea is out of box is welcomed, because eventually, we will end up trying to do something maybe on our own. I don't know, as private companies even. When IMO suggested that the mariners should be key workers. Last time I checked, it was only 52 countries recognized that. There is 174 countries in IMO as a member state. So we should not, stop pressurizing the governments. And this is what I meant by saying that we have to work on how we can make our great industry resilient. So this is our target, that we have to work together. And for example, in Turkey now, it is, the mariners, seafarers are key workers, and they're in the list as the transport workers will be vaccinated in the top 10 list, as I think they are number 5. So it's just then the matter of time when the vaccination will come and how we are going to make this vaccine to reach the vessels. Because I think the governments tend to think very domestically. They think that vessels are like factories. They are in the next neighborhood, so they can drive. So what I learned as BIMCO in this pandemic, that, although we are very well surrounded in our own environment, IMO, Ministry of Transportation, Fisheries, but outside that, we have a lot of things to do, because, nobody really gets us. So that is also one of the tasks in front of us. When it comes to cybersecurity, yes, IMO had to, act upon this. And this will be one of the greatest challenge. And as BIMCO, cybersecurity is one of our, the core things that we tackle, and we will continue to, create clauses, write manuals and talk to and advise our ship owners, how we can, minimize the risk, because as René said very rightfully, there will be always risk. So we always have to be alert.
Thank you. I don't know, are there any questions that we have from the audience? I'm not seeing any so far. We just have a couple of minutes left, but absent some questions, why don't we do a quick lightning round? Last words from each of our other panelists now. Quick, less than a minute, last view on what the biggest challenge is that you can tackle for this business. Rolf.
Oh, I mean, a lot of things have already been said. I still think the biggest challenge is the decarbonization. Yeah. That's going to take a lot of our mental time, and it's also going to take a lot of capital to get that done. And I think it's important that we set ourselves some clear objectives by 30, 40, and 50, so that in the end, we indeed get to zero by 2050.
Thank you. Kathy.
Thanks, John. He just said what I was going to say, so I can be very quick. Decarbonization and continued emphasis on our people, both shoreside and on board the ships. They're the ones that make this work. And we have to give them the tools to make it happen.
Thank you. Mark.
Again, putting people at the very core of our businesses, and yes, stand shoulder to shoulder in pushing for a global solution to the vaccination. But the reality, I think, is that it will come down to the commercial approach to find vaccines for our seafarers, and we need to be ready, and we need to have a fallback plan, because these seafarers deserve that support from us.
Thank you. René.
Yeah, I echo everything that has been said. Our seafarers getting the vaccinations, getting the right decarbonization strategies, and perhaps fundamentally ensuring that shipping is very much on the agenda of the global economy. And I think that's one of the reasons we have this issue with the seafarers, on making them critical employees, or accepting that people have to pay and supply capital for decarbonization of the future. We need to be better at ensuring people understand shipping.
Okay, we have less than a minute. One last question for René. What will be decisive in terms of something approaching a normalization now that there's an overheated container market? Anybody want to tackle that question?
I think you have
Probably Rolf.
Well, I think we're at, I think I may have even butchered the question. I apologize for that, but we're out of time. And I would urge any questions can still be raised with our panelists outside of the panel in the chat room. So I encourage you to do that.
John, maybe since you brought the question to Rolf, we can have him answer and then we wrap up. So we don't.
Okay, well, I guess, the overheated container market, that's also the $1 million question, as Sadan said earlier in the at the beginning of this session. I mean, I've said yesterday also at TPM that I think it's going to take us at least until the end of Q2, because before we will have, somewhat more normal markets, and then hopefully we'll have a more normal Q3 and Q4, because I believe it's in everybody's interest that the market does calm down, that things start running again smoother, and that also, especially the spot rates come down to a level that's more normal than what we see today.
Thank you, Rolf. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists for covering that wide array of topics so well. We appreciate your comments, and audience, thank you very much for watching. And to Capital Link, thank you for supporting this program every year the way you do. We appreciate
John, you're a great moderator. Can't thank you enough. And of course, I can't thank enough our panelists for your wisdom, insight, and thank you to everybody for attending it. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nicholas.